Hello, Ambassador. Hello, Minister.
So we welcome you on over really quickly. We're going
Yes.
to be live
Yeah.
right now on CBC News here.
Mr. LeBlanc, you were very optimistic this morning when you talked about this meeting with Trump officials. How was it? Are you still optimistic?
I think it was a very constructive and positive conversation. Howard Lutnick was there. The National Economic Advisor to President Trump was also there. We started the conversation by discussing our shared priorities around border security and the fight against fentanyl. We took stock of the good work that has been done around illegal migration. We spoke about the appointment of our fentanyl czar, who will be in Washington in a few days. So we believe that the national security interest around border integrity and the common fight against fentanyl is in a positive lane, but we're going to continue to do that work. They described to us the process by which they're reviewing these metrics. So I'm optimistic that that conversation is very constructive. I'm also optimistic that we have a better understanding of the process that Mr. Lutnick is going through in terms of the April 1st sort of global tariff decisions. He talked to us about that process. Um, we also discussed, obviously, our concern around steel and aluminum tariffs and the president's comments earlier this week. We, I think, had a positive conversation around how those sectors, the steel and aluminum sectors in Canada and the United States, are so integrated and how dependent the economies are in doing this work together. So I'm optimistic in that context. But we also agreed to continue the conversations and to be in touch over the next number of days.
What new did you learn about what the Trump administration is looking for? Right now, you're facing three separate sort of tariff threats. The review in April, you're facing the steel and aluminum, and the March 4th border related. What have you learned that's in terms of what's new from what they want from you two? Well, not just you two, but from Canada.
Yeah, so maybe the ambassador will add something. I think we have a clear understanding in terms of the March 4th deadline, um, the conversations of last week around fentanyl and border integrity. We, as I say, reiterated the common progress that we've made together, and that work is ongoing and is expedited. And then we talked about the steel and aluminum sector in Canada and the United States. We had, I think, a good understanding of their concerns in that regard. And all of this ultimately feeds into the decisions that the president will make based on the review that Mr. Lutnick is doing in a global tariff conversation. So I'm confident that we very much have their attention. They made that clear to us that Canada is very much top of mind for the work that Mr. Lutnick's doing. That was encouraging. And we agreed to keep in touch and work closely over the next number of days.
You were unable to get any type of guarantees.
Pardon? Vous voulez ça en français?
My colleagues back in Ottawa are hoping we can
Ah, Ottawa. Moi, je pensais que j'allais voir Azeb. Azeb était à Moncton longtemps. Je la vois en ondes ici.
Could I ask that same en français, s'il vous plaît? What's new that you learned today?
C'était une discussion, je pense, très productive avec M. Lutnick, qui est le conseiller de politique nationale au président Trump. Nous avons, nous avons débuté la conversation en discutant la lutte contre le fentanyl, la question de l'intégrité des frontières. Je pense que nous avons constaté ensemble qu'il y a eu beaucoup de bons progrès au cours des dernières semaines. Nous avons littéralement regardé les chiffres en ce qui a trait aux luttes contre le fentanyl ou la migration illégale. Évidemment, on a partagé nos inquiétudes quant à la question des tarifs douaniers sur le secteur d'aluminium et de l'acier. On a passé beaucoup de temps à discuter l'importance du secteur de l'aluminium ou le secteur de l'acier pour l'économie du Canada et l'économie des États-Unis. Nous avons compris beaucoup de M. Lutnick quant à leur processus d'évaluation des tarifs globaux, les instructions que M. Trump lui a données pour des décisions au tout début du mois d'avril. Et on a conclu, c'était une réunion chaleureuse, c'était une réunion amicale, et on a conclu, ouverte, amicale, et on a conclu avec l'idée qu'on allait maintenir le contact dans les prochains jours. Et moi, j'ai bien hâte de continuer mes discussions avec M. Lutnick.
Minister, if you could possibly clarify two things about global tariffs, the steel and aluminums, which impact several countries. Will Canada be able to get a carve out from that, or is your understanding that those tariffs are coming no matter what in regards to steel and aluminum? And do you have a date?
So you asked about 4 questions there, and some of them ran over one another. So I don't think it's constructive to get into details of what particular date and what particular sector. As I said, I think we shared with them, obviously, our concern around the steel and aluminum trade with the United States. It's important to our economy, but it's also essential to their economy as well. But we had a rather detailed conversation about those sectors, which I thought gave us an understanding of their concerns. We're going to continue, obviously, to work with them, with the Trump administration around the review that Mr. Lutnick is leading for a tariff decision at the beginning of April. Canada and the rest of the world is part of that conversation, but we now have, I think, a good understanding of their process markers over the next number of weeks. And they were very clear that Canada very much has their attention, and they want to work with us to structure an economic deal that's in the interest of both countries. That, to me, was also a very positive takeaway.
And what about the general 25%?
It never came up. Nothing.
What about the general 25% tariffs levied on Canada and Mexico? You mentioned that was tied to fentanyl and our border security. How do you feel about that? Are we able to push that off the table completely? Where do you stand on that? Where does Mr. Lutnick stand on that?
Again, you've asked 4 questions. Pushed, that's 8 in 2. So pushed off the table completely. Those are your words. I wouldn't use those words. We, I think, have made good progress, and particularly with respect to national security issues, the fight against fentanyl on the border, I'm reassured, but the work isn't done. So it's not finished. So the newly appointed fentanyl czar will be in Washington in the next few days. They talked to us about their internal process of getting metrics on what is an encouraging evolution. But that work is ongoing. You can hear Michael. We're heading to another meeting. I'm really,
Canadians are
really
so
quick.
angry in this moment. Does that factor into? Do you bring that into the room when you say, Canadians are so sort of outraged about the 51st state talk, about all the tariff talk, that what it could do to the Canadian economy? Is that a point of leverage that you can pull in those meetings?
I wouldn't have used the point of leverage,
Not leverage,
but
that's a wrong word on my end. But is that something that
so I told them clearly that Canadians have become quite emotional in the last number of weeks and quite united in terms of doing what's necessary to avoid this punitive impact on our economy. We believe it's not in the economic interest of the United States to do this. We have work to do with the government, I think, to continue to make that point. But I certainly raised with them the solidarity that we've seen across the country in terms of meeting this moment in a way that protects the sovereignty of Canada and protects our economic interests.
I think, and I also think that they knew that before we went into that meeting. I think it's well known here in Washington that Canadians were reacting strongly and in a unified way in the face of a lot of uncertainty coming out of Washington. And I know, not just in discussions with the administration, but folks on Capitol Hill, that they have seen this, those who are paying attention to the Canada trade issue. And so my sense is that we didn't need to really, pound the table on that. We can refer to it lightly because it's well understood.
The premiers are meeting with President Trump later on. Is that good?
We're heading to the Capitol. Excuse me.